Deep Sea Embers Chapter 381 to 385. Upon catching sight of the deeply engraved inscriptions, Lawrence and the first mate standing next to him experienced an instantaneous surge of surprise. The bizarre etchings seemed to hold a certain power, demanding the attention of those who beheld them. The first mate couldn't help but voice his astonishment, his question rising from the depths of his confusion: why does the statement, "Humans only have two eyes," appear here, inscribed into the stone? His wide eyes bore into the mystifying message, attempting to discern its underlying meaning. A seemingly interminable silence stretched between them before the first mate could voice his perplexion again: isn't this a basic biological reality? Aside from a few rare genetic conditions, don't all humans possess just two eyes? Lawrence didn't immediately answer, opting to deliberate over the perplexing assertion carved into the stone. At last, he broke the mounting silence, his question probing into the possible origins of the inscription: who do you believe might have authored this engraving? Could it possibly be the original inhabitants of this island? The first mate speculated hesitantly: there were people dwelling here before us, right? It's tough to confirm with certainty about this particular island, but it's an undeniable fact that humans lived on Dagger Island in our known history, Lawrence affirmed, his fingers lightly tracing the bold, deeply cut script. The raw, genuine feel under his fingertips seemed to reverberate with the forceful emotions and the determined intent that had driven the creation of the engraved message: humans only have two eyes. Someone purposely carved this phrase here, and it might symbolize something. Symbolize something. Like what? The first mate asked, his voice echoing the uncertainty in his mind. Possibly that this island was once inhabited by beings that were humanoid in appearance but differed in the attribute of having only two eyes, Lawrence suggested, his gaze lifting to scrutinize the dense fog and the shadowy forms concealed within it. These entities could blend unnoticed into human societies, avoiding straightforward identification. On hearing this conjecture, the first mate drew a subdued breath, his voice shaking slightly as he questioned, then, where did the author of this inscription vanish to? I don't know, Lawrence confessed, shaking his head. His thoughts spontaneously veered towards the sticky black mud they'd come across during their exploration in the strangely deserted docking area. He pushed these seemingly unrelated thoughts to the back of his mind, focusing instead on the port office door, his hand resting on its handle: stay on high alert. The distinctive sound of firearm safeties being disengaged echoed behind him. As Lawrence composed himself, he gently pressed the door, gingerly pushing it open. He deftly stepped aside, positioning himself away from a direct line of sight to avoid becoming an easy target for any potential threats hiding inside. The first mate moved forward, adopting a defensive crouch as he pointed his rifle into the room's dimly lit interior. The sailors following them also raised their weapons, securing the door from various angles and vantage points. The inside of the building lay enshrouded in an unnerving tranquility. The first mate, positioned at the entrance, took a moment to steel his nerves before daring to peer into the interior. There's no one in here, he reported, his voice echoing in the silence, just an abandoned office, eerily well lit. Following this assurance, Lawrence motioned to the sailors and, together with the first mate, ventured inside the vacant space. The room was an unoccupied office devoid of any human presence. A few desks occupied roughly half of the room, with chairs arranged randomly as if the occupants had left in a rush. The overhead electric bulbs and the wall-mounted gas lamps were fully lit, casting a surreal, bright illumination across the room. One peculiar detail stood out: the floor was speckled with patches of the mysterious black mud they had encountered earlier. This dreadful sludge seems to have seeped in here too, the first mate grimaced at the sight of the ominous, dark substance that contaminated the room, his face displaying clear repulsion. He skillfully sidestepped the mucky patches on the floor and proceeded towards the desks. His gaze darted over the cluttered array of paperwork and various office materials scattered haphazardly. Captain, should we inspect these? These are typical documents involved in port operations: cargo logs, staff transfers, patrol records, machinery, and equipment check reports. Lawrence moved closer to the desks, briefly studying some of the papers. His brow furrowed in worry as he continued, the dates, these are from just a few days ago. It seems someone was operating here quite recently, a sailor commented nervously, his voice barely audible. Then they must have left in a hurry, not even sparing the time to tidy up. A rushed departure. Lawrence echoed, his gaze scanning over the disordered desk. An unfinished cup of coffee sat abandoned on a table, a thin layer of dust coating its surface. Near this table, a patch of the black mud had dried, some residue of the substance clinging stubbornly to a chair. His face adopted an increasingly grave expression. Was it really an evacuation, or? The first mate caught the subtle change in the captain's tone. Captain, have you figured something out? Just as Lawrence was about to respond, an ear-splitting noise suddenly shattered the silence from outside the room that emanated from the direction of the harbor square. It was the shrill whine of loudspeakers snapping into action. Buzz. The abrupt sound startled everyone. The sailors reflexively turned their attention towards the window, and in the next instant, a fragmented, distorted announcement marred by static rang out across the entire harbor. The quavering voice of an elderly man, shaken by age, echoed ominously. Announcement: we have been infected. This island is beyond salvation. We will initiate contingency 22. It's been an honor working with you all. We'll meet again beyond the gates of Bartok. With a final, abrasive squeal, the transmission came to an abrupt halt. The first mate, his eyes expanded in disbelief, pivoted rapidly to face Lawrence. Captain, what on earth is happening? But before he could finish articulating his panic, a cataclysmic blast echoed from a distance. In sync with that terrifying detonation, a series of successive explosions reverberated, sounding as if the heavens were rending and the earth was fracturing. A chain of calamitous detonations roared across the entirety of Dagger Island, sending chills of terror and apprehension down the spines of everyone present. Lawrence almost instantly discerned what was transpiring. These were not the sounds of ordinary thunder, they were the deafening roars of explosive charges. It was the island's self-destruction protocols, setting off a domino effect of facility demolitions. Evacuate the building at once. Lawrence's command sliced through the cacophony, his pistol brandished as he discharged a round towards the ceiling. This place is rigged to explode. The thunderous explosions almost drowned out Lawrence's urgent command, but the abrupt report of his gunshot effectively roused the sailors from their state of shock. Without a moment's hesitation, they sprinted towards the exit. A cluster of around a dozen people sprang from the building, barreled down the incline, and bolted towards an open area. The relentless symphony of explosions resonated from all directions, creating the impression that the entire island was being shattered in an apocalyptic blast. However, amidst the chaotic retreat, Lawrence noticed something peculiar. Halt! His command rang out as he skidded to a halt. He discharged another shot into the air, his voice resounding, "Stop!" His abrupt order caused the sailors to halt their frantic escape, who then also perceived the irregularity. The echoes of explosions persisted, but there were no accompanying plumes of smoke nor bursts of destructive light. Only the thunderous noises reverberated across the island. Soon after, the tumultuous noise faded, and the surroundings again fell under the eerie hush that the dense fog seemed to enforce. It was as if the earth-shattering detonations had been nothing more than a communal auditory illusion. Only the noise. The first mate scanned the surroundings in disbelief, grappling with understanding. It's an echo from the past, Lawrence quickly hypothesized, his heart rate slowly returning to normal. Even though he wasn't entirely certain of his conclusion, as the captain, he had to provide the crew with an immediate decision. What we heard was a replay of a past event that transpired on this island, not a present-day explosion. I was terrified just now, one of the sailors confessed, his voice barely a murmur. I thought we were amidst a colossal explosion. The nearest explosion appeared to originate from that direction, the first mate inferred, focusing on the precise point on his compass before indicating towards the farthest edge of the harbor square. Should we venture over there? Let's investigate. Lawrence made the decision swiftly. If something truly catastrophic did happen here, there should be some leftover remnants. With that, the exploration team immediately mobilized towards the enveloping fog, this time treading with a heightened level of caution than before. After an undeterminable amount of time had elapsed, Lawrence found himself standing before the towering silhouette of a large, rundown building. Perched on the edge of a small inlet and buttressed by a rugged cliff face at its rear, the building exhibited unmistakable evidence of severe damage. It was clear that an immense explosion from within had led to its disastrous collapse. From an elevated viewpoint, the first mate examined the remnants of the shattered structure, his voice filled with disbelief. What was this place? Its magnitude is astounding. Our focus should be more on the cataclysmic event that led to such an immense facility being obliterated without hesitation, Lawrence retorted solemnly, advancing a few steps, if the inhabitants of this island. Stop! A voice abruptly sliced through the air, causing Lawrence to stop in his tracks. Martha. He pivoted quickly towards the source of the voice, his tone imbued with a mixture of astonishment and apprehension. But there was only the gently undulating fog devoid of the familiar figure he expected. Captain. The first mate noted Lawrence's unusual reaction and hurriedly scrambled down from his observation point, approaching Lawrence with visible worry. What's wrong? Hallucinations, Lawrence admitted immediately, his face lined with severity. Did any of you hear a voice? We didn't hear anything. The sailors exchanged puzzled glances before one of them finally confessed. Perhaps it would be wise if we didn't venture any further, Lawrence suggested, his face adopting a thoughtful frown. Let's head back to the harbor first, and then. Once more, Martha's voice echoed in his ears, but this time it felt closer. Return to the ship, without delay. Lawrence was momentarily flabbergasted. He forced himself to resist the instinct to turn towards the source of the voice again. He was about to continue speaking when Martha's voice interjected once more. This time it was as if she was whispering directly into his ear, her tone infused with urgency. Get back to the White Oak, now. Lawrence, they're coming. A fleeting expression of surprise darted across Lawrence's face as he involuntarily shot back. Who's approaching? The first mate tensely gripped Lawrence's arm. Captain, who are you conversing with? Instead of answering, Lawrence abruptly turned his gaze in the direction where their ship, the White Oak, was moored. A feeling of dread started to bubble up within him. And in the very next moment, a muffled thud reverberated from that direction as if giving credence to his growing fears. It was the distinct sound of cannon fire. There's cannon fire, the first mate swiftly realized, we're under attack. Back to the ship, Lawrence ordered, spurring the team to dash towards the harbor. As the wind picked up its ferocity, swirling around them, Martha's voice brushed against his ear like a soft whisper. The Seagull has arrived. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Driven by an intense sense of urgency, Lawrence sprinted with all his might, unable to stop himself from stealing a quick, uneasy glance over his shoulder. The spot from where Martha's voice had resonated moments before now only offered the haunting sight of the thick fog characteristic of Dagger Island. The only thing that greeted his anxious gaze was the obstinate, unforgiving mist, an emblematic element of this ominous island. In addition, Martha's voice still echoed in his mind, an unwavering reminder to hasten his retreat from the dreadful island, to seek refuge aboard the White Oak, and to steer the ship away from this daunting location towards the peaceful harbor of Frost. Strangely, Martha herself was nowhere to be seen. However, Lawrence perceived this absence not as an unfortunate event but as divine guidance. Whether his deep-rooted faith influenced this or was a product of his subconscious mind, he found himself interpreting even the slightest signs and instinctive nudges as directions, subtly suggesting a possible path towards escape from his dangerously precarious situation. With his heart pounding in his chest and his muscles straining, he pushed his way towards the harbor. The harsh sting of the frigid wind and the relentless fog battered his face and roared in his ears. His first mate and the crew mustered their courage and rallied around him as the persistent boom of cannon fire echoed through the night, menacing and unceasing. This included the distant gunshots and the firing of the White Oak's lightweight escort cannons. Yet, their efforts to fight back seemed pointless against the overwhelming power of the enemy. It was evident that the odds were significantly against them. The warning about the arrival of the Seagull, which Martha had ominously given, clouded his thoughts. But amidst the ghostly figures shrouded in the fog, which one was the dreaded Seagull? As he drew nearer to the harbor, a ship began to gradually take shape through the grim, gray curtain of fog, revealing the majestic hull of the White Oak. Still securely tied at the end of the pier, the ship's silhouette came into view. The sporadic bursts of bright cannon fire continuously sliced through the fog, illuminating the ship's fore and aft. At differing intervals, towering geysers of water erupted from the nearby sea, a chilling testament to the enemy's relentless attack. The ship's still there. The first mate's jubilant voice cut through the noise upon sighting the White Oak, his cheeriness inspiring the captain and providing a much-needed morale boost to the fatigued sailors to pick up their pace. Jason didn't abandon us. Jason, the second mate, was indeed still on board the ship. Blessed be the storm goddess Gomona. Quick, let's get on the ship to escape this damned place. A deckhand bellowed, frantically swinging his lantern to guide the search party, encouraging them to climb up the hanging rope ladder. The White Oak is just sitting here like a sitting duck. Without further ado, the crew members who had previously been on land made a hasty dash towards the hanging rope ladder. However, with a sudden air of authority, Lawrence stopped dead in his tracks, pulling out his revolver in one swift movement and firing a shot upwards into the dark night sky. Everyone, halt. The unexpected gunshot and their captain's resounding command caught the sailors completely off guard. They stopped in their tracks, looking around with expressions of surprise and bewilderment. First Mate Gus halted too, his face reflecting a deep sense of confusion as he turned to regard the experienced captain. Yet, it took him no more than a split second to comprehend the reason behind the captain's abrupt order to stop. As he tried to catch his breath, the first mate took a moment to assess the situation, his gaze sweeping over the sailors and back towards the captain, all against the unnerving backdrop of the incessant cannon fire. 16 sailors stood looking visibly puzzled and uncertain, their familiar faces mirroring their collective confusion. Can anyone remember how many were in our original party? Lawrence's voice cut through the confusion, his tone urgent, underlining the grave seriousness of the situation at hand. Including both of us, there should be, the first mate responded hastily, pausing for a fraction of a second as he struggled to recall the exact number. However, within a few short seconds, he managed to retrieve the information from the recesses of his memory, exactly 12 sailors. Lawrence's eyes squinted slightly as he surveyed the group standing before him, his mind racing as he counted each and every face. As he carried out this task, a strange, emerald-like glimmer seemed to flash within his eyes. We have 4 extra heads, the first mate announced, his count leading him to the same alarming realization. His weathered face hardened, and with a quick motion, he raised his own firearm and fired a shot into the sky. In the quiet that followed, his voice echoed out, "Everyone, keep a distance of a meter from each other. Face the captain. Keep your hands where we can see them." The gravity of the situation started to settle upon the sailors, their faces reflecting an escalating sense of worry. However, as experienced seamen accustomed to the unpredictable nature of the boundless sea, they instinctively knew how to respond. Following the first mate's stern instructions, the group of 16 sailors quickly spread out, forming a wide circle. The thunderous boom of cannon fire from the White Oak filled the air, punctuating the charged atmosphere. A growing number of towering water columns were springing up around the harbor, indicating the relentless assault of their enemy. The enemy ship, ominously known as the Seagull, seemed to be gradually narrowing the gap while Lawrence's mind worked feverishly. The situation was becoming more dire by the second. Their ship, the White Oak, was dangerously exposed in the harbor, its humble defensive cannons and ship's framework unable to withstand much more of the assault. However, leading this group back to the ship wasn't an option either, not when an unidentified element from the island had seamlessly slipped into their ranks. If these unknown beings managed to board, the White Oak's fate would be virtually sealed. His gaze swept across the 16 sailors in front of him, a sense of desperation creeping in as he tried to identify any unfamiliar or out-of-place faces. When had these additional 4 managed to blend into the group so seamlessly? Was it while they were making their way through the smothering fog? Could it have been at the harbor office? Or during the pandemonium caused by the unending explosions on the island? The sailors, too, were hurriedly examining each other. Trust had become a luxury they could no longer afford. Even their own recollections and judgments were now under suspicion. "Captain," First Mate Gus's voice interrupted Lawrence's frantic thoughts. The veteran sailor's face bore a resolute expression. "The White Oak can't stay here much longer. You need to board the ship without delay." A serious look shadowed Lawrence's face. "What are you implying?" "You should sail the ship to the safety of the open sea, leaving us behind. We'll gradually devise a method to identify and deal with these entities that have slipped into our ranks. Once you're at a safe distance, return for us." As Lawrence met the first mate's gaze, his expression was thoughtful and grave. No one was under any illusion about Gus's proposition. If the White Oak left the harbor, those left on the island would be undeniably stranded, subject to the island's unknown threats. They had all witnessed the inexplicable events here. In a surprisingly short span, 4 unidentified entities had stealthily infiltrated their group. Who could foretell what might happen if they lingered any longer? Don't be in such a rush to sacrifice yourself, Lawrence responded quietly. Suddenly, a spark of inspiration seemed to light up his face, his gaze intensifying. Humans only have 2 eyes. His gaze locked onto one sailor. Then shifted to another, then another, until he finally rested his gaze on a 4th individual. One of the sailors touched himself questioningly. He blinked once, then twice, and then again with his 2 additional eyes. Don't I only have 2 eyes? He asked innocently. Without uttering a word, Lawrence simply raised his revolver, a silent proclamation. The first to join Lawrence in brandishing a weapon was First Mate Gus, and almost as if roused from a trance, the rest of the crew swiftly followed their lead. It was as if a spell had been broken, everyone jolting back to their senses in a collective gasp. They stared at the infiltrators amidst them in a blend of shock and horror, their forms so disturbingly human yet indisputably not. Each sailor had their weapon trained on these eerie doppelgangers. 4 humanoid sailors were now encircled by the crew, their expressions shifting from confusion to disorientation, and then to a stunned stupor. The hastily constructed personas they had assumed seemed to be dissolving, failing to withstand the abrupt shock of discovery. These humanoid imposters swayed where they stood, casting glances up at their captain. All Lawrence could manage was a sigh. You're not my crew. The next moment, to his utter astonishment, a flickering green light sparked into existence in the space before them. Initially, the light was a mere handful of sparks, scattered and dancing amidst the 12 genuine sailors like errant streaks of electric energy. Then, in a blink of an eye, the sparks morphed into a raging inferno. This ghostly green fire roared amongst the crew, its predatory nature evident as it lunged towards the stupefied imposters. The fire roared into life, enwrapping the 4 imposters who convulsed within its emerald clutches. However, before they could utter a scream, they were reduced to piles of black dust, bearing an uncanny resemblance to the dark sludge they had previously encountered on the port slope, only much drier and coarser. The scene instilled terror in the sailors. The ignition of the spectral fire was a chilling reminder of the horrifying encounters they had faced as part of the White Oak's crew. The spine-chilling ordeal with the vanished in the boundless sea, the shocking sight of a city being devoured by flames inland, this fire was eerily familiar. Why had this fire manifested here? Could it be that Captain Duncan was close at hand? Just as this harrowing conjecture sparked in the minds of the sailors, sending a wave of panic surging through them, the fire abruptly extinguished. As quickly as it had ignited and reduced the 4 imposters to dust, the spectral green flames vanished without a trace. Left behind were a group of terror-stricken sailors, a first mate in a state of shock, and a captain who felt that he should have retired some time ago. What just happened? First mate Gus stammered out, gulping down his fear. Captain, that fire, it looked like. It resembled the force of the vanished, Lawrence echoed, his voice trailing off as he suddenly shifted his gaze towards the open sea as if expecting to spot a ghostly vessel. But the only ship in sight was the White Oak, still embroiled in a fierce onslaught. The sailors who had been waving their lanterns at the edge of the deck had disappeared, presumably drawn into the heart of the battle. The crew aboard the White Oak were putting up a desperate fight, risking their lives in an attempt to buy their captain and his party the precious time they needed to board the ship. The vanished wasn't present, yet the flames emblematic of Captain Duncan had inexplicably appeared before them. Stay calm, Lawrence quickly advised, attempting to soothe his rattled sailors. We've faced the vanished before. And don't forget, it was that very ship that saved the city-state of Pland. It's not necessarily our enemy. Haven't you heard the tales? They claim Captain Duncan Abnomar has regained his humanity. Almost instinctively, the first mate whispered a silent prayer to the storm goddess, then posed his question, Captain, should we board the ship now? Yes, swiftly. We must get aboard before any other unknown elements manage to infiltrate our group. Lawrence commanded with determination. The reverberating roar of cannon fire resonated powerfully in the surrounding atmosphere, accompanied by the searing shriek of artillery shells that pierced the air with an ominous tone. These lethal projectiles arced high into the sky before descending at a frightening speed, their forceful impact with the water resulting in colossal geysers that erupted both within the harbor and far beyond its boundaries. Some of these deadly missiles narrowly missed the hull of the White Oak, causing an uproar of violent waves that rocked the ship with formidable intensity. The structure of the ship groaned ominously, a distressing cry that testified to the fierce bombardment it was undergoing. At the helm of this pandemonium were Captain Lawrence and his first mate, Gus, accompanied by a dozen of their steadfast crew members. They ascended the rope ladder in a frenzy, ultimately reaching the safety of the White Oak's deck and escaping the cannon fire's epicenter. However, as they distanced themselves from the danger, the ominous silhouette of Dagger Island became a menacing shadow in their wake, a grim reminder of the perilous consequences that awaited anyone daring enough to venture back without permission. A bosun, a towering figure with a rifle firmly gripped in his hands, an almost irrelevant weapon in the face of such a maritime confrontation, rushed towards Lawrence. He visually assessed the captain, his anxious eyes scanning for any signs of injury. Upon confirming Lawrence's unscathed condition, he exhaled a deep breath of relief. Thank God. You've returned. There was an earth-shaking blast from the island. When you failed to return, the second mate grew worried, thinking that something might have befallen you. Memories of recent events at the dockside square flooded Lawrence's mind, their vivid recall causing his face to visibly express a complex whirl of emotions. He remembered the sudden appearance of the 4 additional sailors and the bizarre green flames that added an uncanny aura to the scenario. Lawrence was indeed privy to significant occurrences on the island, but this was neither the time nor place to delve into those matters. That's a discussion for a later time, he responded curtly, dismissing the boatswain's inquiries with a calm shake of his head. What's our current situation? Where's Jason? The second mate is orchestrating our defensive strategy from the bridge. We're in the throes of battle with an unidentified warship, the bosun quickly briefed. As soon as that ship entered our radar, it initiated a relentless attack. It's been slowly but steadily closing in on us, and we just endured a hit on the stern. The damage is thankfully minor, but we must make our retreat immediately. A warship's firepower far outmatches the White Oak. Set our course away from this chaos, Lawrence instructed without a shred of hesitation. The ship's steam core issued a low, menacing rumble as the metallic catalyst began to unleash a surge of powerful energy. This vigorous propulsion system set the ship's propellers in forceful motion, enabling the White Oak to make a swift exit from the danger-riddled harbor. Amid the gigantic waterspouts created by the unyielding cannon fire, the magnificent exploration vessel sped away with its pristine white hull, leaving Dagger Island obscured behind a dense curtain of fog. Yet, their pursuers remained undeterred, pursuing them with unwavering resolve. Lawrence made his way to the bridge, scrutinizing the escalating naval situation through the expansive window at the ship's stern. Far in the distance, contrasted against the immense, undulating expanse of the sea, he could discern the intimidating silhouette of their adversary, a medium-sized warship unyielding in its relentless pursuit. It continued to discharge its main cannon from the bow, each subsequent shot igniting a brilliant flash that penetrated the enveloping darkness, casting an eerie illumination over the surrounding sea. The fact that their pursuer was a smaller warship rather than an imposing, gargantuan battleship was indeed fortuitous. Had their opponent been of the latter class, the White Oak would have undoubtedly been reduced to wreckage by now. Regrettably, the enemy's ship demonstrated remarkable agility. Despite the White Oak pushing forward at maximum velocity, Lawrence could see the looming inevitability: their pursuers would soon gain on them and surpass their pace. The enemy warship was unrelenting, steadily diminishing the gap that separated them. We can't outpace them, the first mate's voice resonated with a thread of despair. Their speed is unmatched, and our weaponry simply isn't equipped to take on a warship. Lawrence kept his silence, his mind caught in a whirlwind of tactical calculations as he attempted to devise a quick strategy. Despite being classified as a civilian vessel, the White Oak was far from vulnerable. As a state-of-the-art exploration vessel, constructed for extensive journeys across the vast and unpredictable boundless seas and explicitly designed to transport hazardous, sealed artifacts between various city-states, it was equipped with a military-grade steam core and a sophisticated anti-sinking structure. The ship's keel, hull, and superstructure had all been significantly fortified, lending it a durability akin to a military vessel of similar size. However, its major shortcoming was the lack of significant firepower. As a civilian ship, it was equipped with only a handful of small-caliber cannons designed to ward off minor pirate threats or to repel aggressive marine creatures. In the face of a warship armed to the teeth with advanced weaponry, these defenses were patently insufficient. Given these circumstances, the White Oak's capture seemed imminent. As the enemy ship relentlessly closed the distance, their volleys of gunfire were bound to increase in accuracy. Regardless of the vessel's robustness, it was clear that enduring a sustained and concentrated artillery onslaught was beyond its capacity. Suddenly, a shrill whistle echoed from afar, promptly followed by a thunderous explosion that jarred Lawrence from his deep reflections. The impact's force resonated in his ears, and the deck quaked violently beneath his feet. In the corner of his eye, he observed a terrifying inferno rip through the White Oak's side, causing twisted shards of metal and splintered fragments of the deck's structure to scatter haphazardly. "We've taken a hit on the starboard side, extinguish the fire," roared the bosun. Even amidst the violent upheaval, Lawrence managed to maintain his balance. His countenance abruptly altered, suggesting a sudden, decisive idea that dawned on him. "Bring me the cargo," he addressed his first mate, who was desperately attempting to restore order on the bridge. "The cargo." The first mate momentarily faltered, but a flicker of comprehension swiftly crossed his face. A mix of dread and determination reflected in his eyes as he promptly complied, handing Lawrence the ship's logbook. Lawrence briskly flipped through the logbook, his eyes darting over the entries until they rested on one particular line. "Unlock the number 2 containment room and bring Anomaly 077 to the bridge," he commanded the first mate with resolute determination. "Make sure a fresh blanket and a new binding rope are at hand for secondary sealing." The first mate's expression turned grave despite anticipating such a command. "Captain, are you certain?" "We have no other options," Lawrence asserted with absolute conviction. "There are historical precedents for unsealing the cargo in critical situations. If the Church wishes to reproach us later, I will assume full responsibility." The first mate appeared to want to dispute the order, but under Lawrence's firm gaze, he swallowed his reservations and responded with a resolute nod. "Aye, Captain." The order was executed promptly. A team of sailors, specifically trained to handle such sealed artifacts, quickly descended into the ship's belly, unlocked containment room number 2, and followed the exact protocol to deactivate the seal enveloping Anomaly 077. Shortly after, amid the relentless cacophony of cannon fire, a group of sailors emerged onto the bridge. They carried Anomaly 077 and gingerly placed the retrieved object before Lawrence. Lawrence glanced down, his face imbued with a solemn gravity as he examined the anomalous object, brought up from the sealed chamber. Lying before him was a withered corpse, tightly swathed in layers of cloth. Anomaly 077, often affectionately dubbed as the Sailor, was a mystifying relic that Lawrence had grown to know well due to its frequent presence among his ship's distinctive cargo. This baffling artifact was initially unearthed on an exploratory vessel that had inexplicably vanished for 3 years, and it was believed to be the catalyst for the ship's unexplained absence. Anomaly 077 presented itself as a 1.7-meter-tall mummified figure that, once unsealed, exhibited signs of life. It was even capable of speech and displayed noticeable cognitive functions. Its characteristics were eerily consistent with the role suggested by its description. As a sailor, it had an inherent compulsion to assume control of the closest ship, taking over all its operations within minimal time, regardless of external conditions, the vessel's specifications, or its control systems. Once it established control, it would instantaneously teleport the ship away. This process, which transpired in a matter of minutes, could be applied to any ship, propelling it to a random location on the ocean. However, this teleportation was far from a tranquil voyage. Ships affected by Anomaly 077 invariably rematerialized at the heart of a raging storm. It remained an enigma whether Anomaly 077 intentionally chose the storm as the teleportation destination or if the tempest was an inadvertent byproduct of the teleportation procedure. Nonetheless, it was well documented that only a select few ships were successful in escaping unscathed from the turbulent storm that awaited at the endpoint. Innumerable ships and many unfortunate individuals had succumbed to Anomaly 77's unpredictable whims. However, as per Lawrence's understanding, handling Anomaly 077 wasn't overly complex. Once unsealed, it would independently activate its abilities, yet it could be easily resealed after the teleportation. Simply tying a new binding rope around its neck would render it inactive, and wrapping it in a shroud would induce it back into a dormant state. The mummified entity exhibited no extraordinary physical prowess or battle capacities. The only hurdle that awaited the White Oak's crew post the impending teleportation was to steer through a fierce storm, a challenge that Lawrence and his men had encountered and triumphed over several times before. Bending over the corpse, cloaked in a fabric of mystery, Lawrence gently placed his hand on the cloth. The ship's crew stationed on the bridge observed with a blend of apprehension and grim fascination, their eyes riveted on this eerie tableau. Drawing a deep breath, Lawrence gingerly untied the knot that fastened the shroud. Almost immediately, he perceived a subtle gasp for air, the sound seemingly emanating from the mummified entity hidden beneath the cloth. The shroud slithered off as though propelled by an unseen force, exposing Anomaly 077 to the wide-eyed crew. The revealed figure was a gaunt corpse clad in the disintegrating remnants of ancient sailors' garments. Its sparse hair was dry and brittle, its frame whittled down to skeletal thinness, and it lay motionless on the deck. The mummy's chest initiated a rhythmic pattern of subtle rises and falls. The movement grew so pronounced that Lawrence felt he could perceive the throbbing beat of a heart and the steady tempo of breath. Anomaly 077 had been activated, the sailor had awakened from its sealed hibernation. Slowly, the mummy opened its eyes and laboriously pulled itself into a sitting position, its joints producing a chorus of creaking noises. Assume interim control of this ship, Lawrence instructed, his countenance a tumult of conflicting emotions. We need to facilitate a quick exit. Anomaly 077 hoisted itself to its feet, its gaze meandering around its surroundings before ultimately settling on Lawrence. Inexplicably, Lawrence detected what appeared to be a hint of apprehension etched onto that ancient, unsettling face. Astonishingly, he observed the mummy faintly shivering. This isn't a prank. The mummy's voice echoed, a grating whisper laden with terror. In the ensuing moment, under the collective scrutiny of the crew, it shut its eyes, pretending to be lifeless while clutching the fallen shroud to swathe over itself again. Lawrence. The crew. Anomaly 077, an infamous force that was ranked among the 100 most dangerous anomalies, had earned a notorious reputation for causing devastating tempests. These intense storms led to the tragic sinking of numerous ships and the grievous loss of thousands of mariners. Distinctly unlike the typical anomalies, this one had an eerie resemblance to a sentient organism. It appeared to possess a consciousness and demonstrated characteristics similar to those of a thinking, feeling being. Due to its alarming nature, it demanded extreme caution from religious leaders in every city-state where its presence was known. However, in a twist of fate, this formidable anomaly chose to act as if it were harmless or even dead when it encountered Lawrence, intentionally concealing its mighty powers. When Lawrence set about activating Anomaly 077, he had taken into account a range of possible outcomes, formulating a host of contingency plans to contain the entity, often referred to as the Sailor. Yet, the anomaly's surprising choice to pretend to be lifeless exceeded even his most extreme anticipations. The elderly captain raised his eyes, locking gaze with his first officer. Both were puzzled by the inconsistent behavior of the bandaged entity before them, which did not align with the documented accounts of the anomaly. Their contemplation was suddenly cut short by the deafening sounds of enormous waterspouts erupting from the adjacent sea and the subsequent blast of the White Oak's defensive artillery. Their initial shock quickly morphed into a state of urgency as the Seagull, a swift and threatening adversary ship, was rapidly closing in on them. With an enemy that they could neither outpace nor outmatch in combat, their only chance of escaping this precarious predicament hinged on the Sailor. The anomaly's unique capacity to teleport entire ships presented the only possible avenue for the crew of the White Oak to dodge their imminent catastrophe. With this stark realization, Lawrence lowered his eyes, closely studying the mummy-like figure that persisted in maintaining its feigned demise, its eyes securely closed. Regardless of the unpredictable elements at play, Lawrence was resolute in his intent to coax the anomaly into assisting them. Wake up! Lawrence cried out, the urgency clear in his voice. He extended his hand, grabbing the collar of Anomaly 077 and shaking it vigorously. The act of physically handling the mummy was deeply unsettling, yet the critical nature of their situation overrode any feelings of revulsion. I know you've managed to escape your seal. You now hold control over this ship. Sailor, isn't the command of a ship innate to you? Isn't your power typically volatile and unpredictable? Assume control of this vessel. We must vacate this location immediately. When subjected to Lawrence's vehement shaking, the mummy emitted a creaking sound from its rigid joints, though its eyes remained stubbornly sealed. Nevertheless, its chest's discernible rise and fall was an undeniable indication of its non-dead status. Outside, the escalating chaos characterized by incessant detonations that were perilously threatening the integrity of the white oak only served to heighten Lawrence's apprehension. Unable to control his mounting frustration, he smacked the mummy with force. "I know you're awake." Unable to uphold its pretense any longer, the mummy succumbed to Lawrence's abrasive actions and unveiled its eyes with shuddering tremors. However, its immediate reflex was to avert Lawrence's penetrating stare, awkwardly shifting its position to one side. Its voice, laced with a sense of irritation, rose in protest. "Stop this. Can't I simply return to my rest? This isn't a topic for joking. Do not tamper with the ship, do not dare lay a finger on it." Lawrence, however, was unresponsive to the pleading cries of Anomaly 077. The moment he saw the mummy's eyes flutter open, he took advantage of the opportunity and hoisted it, dragging it towards the helm of the ship. Reacting to the dire situation, some of the crew members also sprang into action. The bravest among them dared to surge forward to offer their assistance. Almost forcibly, they pressed the sailor's shriveled body against the ship's steering wheel while the first mate shouted from the background, "Push it onto the wheel. It's the fastest way to activate its powers." Still, Anomaly 077 continued to resist, its screams of desperate protest echoing across the ship. "Let go of me. Let go of me. You can't impose this on me. Someone, save me. What kind of monsters are you? I beg of you, please. Grab the damn wheel." Lawrence roared, exerting his full strength to thrust the mummy's frail form towards the ship's steering equipment. "This ordeal will be over before you know it. No. Help. Murder." Anomaly 077 pushed back with an unexpected show of vigor, so potent that several robust crew members of the White Oak struggled to subdue its thrashing limbs. In the heat of its frantic resistance, it tried to glance back towards its earlier resting place. "Permit me to go back. Please, just tie a noose around my neck. I vow to remain motionless. I won't cause any more disturbance. Or give me the rope, I'll hang myself. Please, don't force me to touch this." The ship's bridge had spiraled into complete pandemonium. The unfolding spectacle was uncannily surreal. Anomaly 077, a name that struck fear into the hearts of countless sea captains and sailors, was now begging and writhing like a helpless prisoner bound to the ship. Conversely, the frantic crew of the White Oak was forcibly attempting to guide the anomalies' hands towards the ship's helm. It was a scene so preposterously bizarre that even the most deranged inmates in an asylum couldn't have imagined it during their most extravagant delusions. However, this was the bleak and unsettling reality on board the White Oak. However, Lawrence found himself unable to spare a moment to ruminate on the sheer absurdity of the situation unfolding. His primary focus was the ominous shape of the seagull steadily drawing closer and the alarming precision of its cannon fire. The starboard side of the White Oak had sustained multiple hits, and an aggressive fire was swiftly consuming the ship's stern. If the next cannonball struck their engine room, ammunition depot, or even the bridge, it would signify their impending doom. As this chilling thought raced through his mind, a piercing whistle cut through the air again, sending a wave of dread down Lawrence's mind. This is disastrous. An overwhelming explosion consumed the upper deck in the ensuing moment, launching an enormous fireball towards the heavens, its fiery tendrils clawing perilously close to the bridge. The Seagull's cannon fire had scored a direct hit on the side of the White Oak's bridge. This strike was the mortal blow. The ensuing explosion emerged with a deafening roar. Both metal and glass were shattered into fragments under the devastating impact of the blast. Debris from the destroyed bridge transformed into deadly projectiles, careening wildly in every direction. Lawrence's vision was momentarily blinded by a brilliant white light, followed by the sight of his first mate being hurled into the air, his body instantly consumed by the encroaching flames. The fire continued its relentless advance, engulfing the remaining sailors on the bridge and, finally, him. A voracious inferno claimed all in its path. Lawrence watched as the gigantic fireball expanded, swallowing the entire bridge, with his body gradually being incinerated by the flames. Time seemed to slow down, allowing him to perceive the scene with unnerving clarity, including the eerie transformation of the flames into a strange, ghostly green color. Lawrence's mind was momentarily in a state of void. Before he could comprehend the spectacle unraveling before him, the furious red fireball that had decimated the bridge transformed into a massive expanse of spectral green flames. These otherworldly flames swept over everything within their reach: metal, wood, glass, leather. All substances that came into contact with the flames became translucent as if they had been converted into spirits. One after another, the crew members caught in the fiery maelstrom collapsed, wrapped in the ghostly flames. Their flesh and bones appeared as clear as crystal. Then, remarkably, each one of them, seemingly unharmed, rose and exchanged perplexed looks. The spectacle was eerily similar to their initial encounter with the Vanished. It was as if the horrific event that had previously transpired aboard the White Oak was playing out once again. The sensation of solid ground beneath his feet yanked Lawrence from his daze. Involuntarily, he found himself standing at the helm, his body engulfed in a halo of ghostly flames. Almost automatically, he extended his hand, his fingers wrapping tightly around the ship's wheel. Instantly, a profound bond surged through him. Every detail of the White Oak, from each individual screw to a window, a length of rope, was reflected vividly in his mind as if they were physical extensions of his own being. Despite his years of intimate familiarity with the ship, he had never experienced such an intense connection. Accompanying this sensory onslaught was a compelling thought, like an authoritative voice dictating his fate. You now belong to the Vanished fleet. Dedicate your allegiance to Captain Duncan. Baffled, Lawrence tightened his grip on the wheel, directing the White Oak as it seamlessly responded to his mental commands. Gradually, he guided the ship towards the enemy vessel, rapidly closing in on them. Anomaly 077 remained there, untouched by the earlier explosion. This mummy-like entity was curled up near the helm, trembling and whimpering as it watched the spectral flames flicker around it. I was explicit about not wanting to touch it, yet you forced me. I couldn't dare defy, for a sailor who rebels will be chained to a cannonball and cast into the sea. I am familiar with the seafaring code. I am the sailor. Lawrence glanced at the entity now self-identifying as the sailor. His comprehension of the unfolding events was far from complete, yet his menacing gaze was to silence Anomaly 077 and wrangle the corpse under his control. The mummy-like figure cautiously rose to its feet under this state, observing the astounding spectacle. The bridge, devastated by the previous attack, was experiencing rapid restoration under the influence of the spectral flame. The entire crew, now resembling ghosts, instinctively resumed their duties, waiting for their captain's orders. Captain, Anomaly 077 turned towards Lawrence. What should be our next move? Lawrence was once again perplexed, but then a realization seemed to dawn on him. He slowly averted his gaze. The Vanished fleet is under attack. Retaliate. Retaliate. Anomaly 077 instantly echoed. Retaliate. Retaliate. The voice of First Mate Gus boomed from the side. His body was wreathed in flames, the crackling sound of the fire intertwining with his words. Follow the captain's command. Retaliate. Retaliate. The chorus was echoed by the crew stationed on the bridge in perfect harmony. Simultaneously, each spectral crew member aboard the White Oak received the captain's command. The ship, reborn amidst the flames, sprang into action. Its steam core roared, all gun turrets swiveled into position, and a resonating steam whistle mingled with a primal roar echoed across the sea. The ship beneath them lunged forward, rapidly closing the gap with the Seagull. Almost concurrently, Lawrence caught sight of another specter flanking the White Oak, an additional vessel shrouded in a dense fog and billowing smoke, only visible as a menacing silhouette. Its silhouette bore an uncanny resemblance to that of the White Oak, undoubtedly a sibling ship of the same class. The enigmatic vessel surged ahead in perfect unison with the White Oak, launching a unified assault against the Seagull. Through the ascending spectral flames, Lawrence gazed, dumbstruck, at the phantom warship that had suddenly materialized beside them. After what seemed like an eternity, he whispered its name as though in a spellbound state. The Black Oak, Martha. There navigated a formidable warship within a shroud of darkness, a strange vessel seemingly pieced together from a diverse mixture of smoke, fog, and miscellaneous remnants. Sailing alongside the White Oak, this mysterious craft boldly ventured towards the Seagull, their looming foe. The ship's ambiguous silhouette, masked in a dense fog, suggested a shared lineage with the White Oak, yet it maintained its unique features. The hazy sight was at odds with Lawrence's mental image of the ship, yet in spite of its apparent state of ruin and alteration, it was unmistakably the same ship. The ship's appearance was unusual and eccentric, but it nonetheless conjured a surge of familiarity and rekindled potent memories just as it invariably did in Lawrence's dreams. This ship was indeed the Black Oak. It had returned as if resurrected from the annals of the past, sailing alongside its twin, the White Oak, in a poignant reminder of their previous voyages together. Suddenly, a piercing sound of the steam whistle cut through the old captain's confusion and dreamlike trance. The noise emanated from the spectral ship, serving as a harsh wake-up call to Lawrence that this was not a time for idle reminiscing amidst such critical circumstances. The daunting sound of shells raining from the heavens echoed again as the ruthless attack from the Seagull carried on mercilessly. Lawrence's focus was quickly redirected as he watched a flaming orb strike the bow of the White Oak. In a flash, flames soared skyward. The fiery projectile was engulfed and absorbed by the vibrant green flames already ravaging the ship. The impact brutally ripped apart a section of the ship's bow, sending fiery chunks of molten metal scattering in all directions. Yet, in the next moment, the devastated structure began to mend as if time was reversing, restoring the ship to its pristine state amidst the swirling green inferno. Lawrence felt a sensation of being drained, like his vitality and life force were being leached away from his body. However, the lost energy was rapidly replaced by the otherworldly flames enveloping him. Subsequently, the defensive artillery stationed on the bow and flanks of the White Oak sprang into life, releasing a barrage of shells that shrieked through the air like vengeful spirits, leaving trails of glowing streaks behind. Almost simultaneously, the adjacent Black Oak launched its attack. The deafening roar of cannons reverberated, and within the swelling black fog, a series of bright flashes appeared. Ghostly shells were catapulted from the mist, ruthlessly descending upon the enemy vessel in the distance. Holding the wheel with an unyielding grip, Lawrence could sense the potent vibrations from each cannon blast that radiated through the ship's body. His perception seemed to magnify, extending not only along the trajectory of the soaring shells but also the rhythmic pulsations of the seawater until it felt like his senses encompassed the entirety of the vast ocean. At the far reach of his amplified senses, the enemy vessel, Seagull, emerged like a luminescent beacon within the encompassing darkness, emanating a formidable, almost blinding, aura. Not so long ago, the Seagull was regarded as a fearsome rival for the White Oak. However, in this charged atmosphere, Lawrence found himself viewing the adversary not as a threatening opponent but as an enticing prey, ripe and ready to be consumed. Within moments, the White Oak's retaliatory fire connected with the Seagull with unwavering precision. A monstrous explosion ensued, the raging flames reaching high towards the sky. The unique warship looked as though it had been viciously torn apart by an invisible beast, with a significant portion of it brutally ripped away. The gaping wound unveiled the strangely contorted internal framework of the enemy ship in harsh detail. Despite the inflicted damage being substantial, it was far from being a fatal blow. Full speed, Lawrence commanded, his hands firmly anchored on the wheel, his eyes intently focused on the steadily advancing enemy vessel. He was acutely aware of the subsequent actions needed to ensure the White Oak survives. We need to replenish. His first mate Gus echoed the command across the ship's bridge. Yes, full speed. The ship's steam core bellowed with renewed vigor, driving the already high-speed White Oak to even further extremes. Like a swift hunting falcon, the ship lunged towards the distant Seagull. Sailing in parallel, the Black Oak mirrored its companion's pace and trajectory. Despite the looming clash, the Seagull showed no intentions of adjusting its course or decelerating. This ship, which had initiated an unrelenting assault since its arrival, now seemed to resemble an unthinking, rampaging monster. Unaffected by the drastic metamorphoses of the White Oak and the turning tide of the battle, it resolutely stuck to its initial objective, complete annihilation of the enemy. Two colossal ships, one enveloped in eerie green flames, the other sheathed in a twisted, dark, fantastical architecture, sped towards each other with terrifying velocity. The shrill whistle of the steam horn sliced through the air, its high-pitched cry seemingly tearing the very fabric of the sky apart. A ceaseless salvo of shells launched from both vessels churned the ocean surface, their intensifying bombardment illuminating the seascape and skies. The gap between them shrank rapidly, their reciprocal fire striking the hulls with increasing regularity and ripping through the structures of both vessels. Lawrence and his crew stood on the White Oak command deck, their gaze unwaveringly directed ahead. Their minds seemed to be held captive by a powerful surge of anticipation. Any trace of fear and hesitancy had evaporated from the souls aboard, supplanted by a fervent readiness for the imminent, unavoidable clash. Then, the moment of impact arrived. Much like a fragile snowball forcefully compressed against the scorching surface of a blazing furnace, the prow of the seagull plunged headlong into the raging spectral flames that encased the white oak. Accompanied by a terrifying shriek and a loud roar reminiscent of a chorus of millions crying out simultaneously, the seemingly robust steel hull disintegrated gradually in the face of the intense emerald flames. As the catastrophic collision persisted, the seagull began to vanish from bow to stern into the fiery jaws of the white oak, giving the impression of a beast being swallowed whole. Even as the last turret of the seagull was consumed by the ghostly flames, the ceaseless barrage of cannon fire exchanged between the two vessels didn't falter for a moment. Eventually, a deafening silence descended upon the battlefield. After relentlessly roaring and belching fire, the defensive cannons of the white oak fell quiet as well the rumble from its steam core. In addition, the ethereal flames that had been rampaging across the ship started to calm, transitioning from their previously aggressive state into a gentle, tranquil burn along the ship's hull. Lawrence found himself momentarily disoriented. His hands had slipped from the wheel without him noticing, and he found himself observing the scene on the command deck. One by one, the sailors turned their heads towards him. Their physical forms seemed to meld with spectral apparitions, casting an unearthly pallor onto their faces. Their empty eyes appeared devoid of any trace of human cognition or empathy. Blinking, Lawrence could feel the peripheries of his consciousness starting to waver, threatening to engulf him in obscurity, when a figure abruptly materialized at the edge of his vision. A young man had materialized as if emerging from the ether, stepping through the rising spectral flames surrounding him. He was attired in the deep blue robes of a storm priest, a radiant emblem gleaming on his chest. With purposeful strides, he advanced towards Lawrence, extended his hand, and pressed his glowing emblem against Lawrence's chest. An intense wave of heat radiated from his chest, and Lawrence felt his faltering mind abruptly regain its equilibrium. His humanity and rationality surged back into his consciousness like a jolt of electricity. As the fog of confusion started to lift from the captain's mind, the crew members aboard the White Oak also seemed to emerge from their spectral stupor. They exchanged glances as if trying to piece together the fragments of memory from the final showdown, the climactic clash, and the monumental collision between the White Oak and the Seagull. Some reacted with retrospective cries of awe, others examined their bodies instinctively, while some turned their gaze towards the young priest who had seemingly materialized on the command deck. A crease appeared on Lawrence's forehead as he studied the young man standing before him. He paused for a moment, then hesitantly voiced, "Priest Jansen." "It's me, thank God, you can finally see me," came the breathless reply from the young ship's priest. He seemed to be gasping for air as if he had just emerged from the sea's depths. His robe was soaking, with water trickling down from his hair and neck as he spoke. "Thanks to the protection of the storm goddess, I've been shouting at your side for days." A residue of confusion still lingered within Lawrence. It took him a few moments to gradually recall another peculiar circumstance from the past few days. A ship's priest should always be on board, just like the sun should always be in the sky. However, throughout this time, he hadn't laid eyes on this young priest once. Priest Jansen had not only vanished from everyone's sight but also from their memories, to such an extent that the crew had forgotten the basic tenet that there should be a priest on board. Lawrence had noticed the strange absence of the sun, yet it was only now that he realized Priest Jansen had been missing too. What happened? Like a man slowly emerging from a dream, the captain turned his head and asked in a gentle tone. "I'm not entirely sure. Over the past few days, it felt like I was cut off from all of you, confined within a different dimension." The drenched young priest shook his head, a wry smile playing on his lips. "I could see everyone, but nobody could see me, as if I had become an outsider on this ship. It was only just now, when the ship underwent a transformation, amidst the flames that I felt the barrier starting to fade. At the same time, I noticed something was wrong with your mental state, so I tried to stabilize your mind with the holy emblem. Luckily, I managed to do it in time." As Lawrence listened to the priest's explanation, a maelstrom of disorganized thoughts and speculations swirled through his mind. Upon hearing the term improper mental state, a delayed sensation of fear finally seized his heart. Lawrence vividly remembered the uncanny state he and his crew found themselves in during the final stretch of their skirmish with the Seagull. The memory sent a shiver down his spine, making him feel as though he was on the brink of breaking out into a cold sweat. However, no sweat materialized, he was still veiled in spectral flames, and his phantom-like form showed no signs of returning to normal. Lawrence shifted his gaze down to his arm, its appearance still ghostly and translucent, his mind teeming with a myriad of conjectures. Is this the blessing from the vanished? The seasoned captain shook his head, a mirthless laugh slipped past his lips. He was uncertain whether to regard their current state as a stroke of luck or a cruel twist of fate. Surviving the relentless scrutiny of Duncan Abnomar appears to be no simple feat, but at least we've made it, if indeed, we can consider this to be alive. With these words, he slowly lifted his eyes, peering through a nearby porthole, taking in the expansive sea that flowed alongside the ship and the mysterious dark ship mirroring the White Oak's path.